Good morning, Biology 102. Today we are talking about the respiration system and respiratory system. This particular system is going to have the overall function of doing gas exchanges for us. Animals get their oxygen from different places depending on the animal. So we get ours from air. About 21% of the air column is oxygen typically. And in water, you have maybe 3 to 5% oxygen, and that can be greatly affected by various other sort of factors. But you can see that animals, whether we breathe through the air or water, we will have almost like this feathery, highly branched respiratory surface that allows us to do these gas exchanges, take in oxygen and give off CO2. Our respiratory surface happens to be lungs. It's a little different than gills and other things that we see in other animals. Now, let's move forward and talk about this respiratory system, but I want to first talk about breathing. Breathing is the ventilation of lungs through an alternation of inhalation and exhalation. You probably know that inhalation is taking air in and exhalation is expelling air out of your lungs, but I don't know if you know that you are considered a negative pressure breather. And we actually, as humans, we don't actively go after our air and gulp air like whoo, right? We actually passively move air using air pressure differences. So I want to talk you through how breathing works inside of your body. Breathing works using this sheet of muscles down here called the diaphragm. The diaphragm is a sheet of muscles that we can contract and relax. And by contracting and relaxing the diaphragm, we can change the air pressure in and around our lungs. Air pressure wants to move from where it's highest to where it's lowest. And so we're going to utilize this kind of passive transfer of air in order to complete our breathing. Our diaphragm is this sheet of muscles underneath our lungs, and as we contract it, it actually moves down. We do this in inhalation, and when we do this, we actually open up our air space. So we make less pressure around our lungs. This means that air pressure outside of the body is higher than what it is inside of the lungs. And in inhalation, when we do this, we expand this lung space, then air wants to move passively in us in inhalation. In exhalation, the opposite happens. Our diaphragm relaxes and that squeezes up. It presses up on your lungs and squeezes that space, making a higher pressure inside your lungs and less pressure atmospherically outside of the lungs. So now air wants to move out of our lungs in exhalation. Now, this diaphragm is a tricky device. We cannot just actively go after air. So some of you might have actually gotten the wind knocked out of you in your lives, where maybe a baseball hit you. That happened to my husband once, or you get punched in the gut and in this area. And if you stun this diaphragm, then you can't take air in. And so this has never actually personally happened to me, but I assume you lie there and your brain rapid fires like, I can't breathe, because if that diaphragm is stunned, then you cannot breathe and sort of actively take in air. We can only use it to sort of passively take in air. So you have to wait for that diaphragm to recover, and then your breathing will return. The other thing that you might have experienced is hiccups, where this sheet of muscles gets a temporary spasm in it, and it causes quick contractions and relaxations. This forces air out of like sort of your airway tube, and it snaps the epiglottis over your trachea, making that sound that is something that you're familiar with hiccups. So there are some things that can kind of go wrong with the system, but it's a nice system. We don't have to actively gulp our air, but rather we can passively change the size and the pressure in our lungs in order to breathe and complete our breathing. Now, also, not only does the diaphragm contribute to breathing, but the brain is also actively controlling how fast you complete these inhalations and exhalations. Normally at resting, you're about 10, 14 inhalations per minute, but your brain's always receiving information. And in the case of breathing, it's receiving information from these carotid area, artery area, and up to the brain about carbon dioxide and how much carbon dioxide is in and around your bloodstream. If you were to say go out and like run a marathon and you're working your muscles and you're running cellular respiration really fast, then you're going to be making a lot of CO2. That's going to raise your CO2 levels in your bloodstream, and your brain will recognize that and then start to increase your breathing to accommodate that and to try to exhale off that CO2. Most of the time, your brain is receiving this in kind of the central area and then using the lower brain stem, so an involuntary area of the brain to run these breaths. Most of us don't think about breathing. However, it's interesting, breathing is one thing we can control consciously. So we can switch it to a different area of the brain and actually actively hold our breath. I could say, everybody hold your breath for 10 seconds, like, and we could complete that together, right? So it's kind of an interesting system that is most of the time run in an involuntary fashion, but we can sort of override that and then consciously hold our breath. Breathing is important for this respiration because we're trying to take in our oxygen and get rid of CO2. So I want to walk you through your respiratory organs, starting with your nose and your mouth as a space to sort of take in your air, followed all the way down to your alveoli or your alveolar sacs. And I want you to know the order both for inhalation and exhalation. This is a dead end street, so unlike your digestive tract that's moving in one direction, we're going to inhale, hit these alveolar sacs, and then exhalation will be the opposite of order, right, of these particular organs. So let's take a look at what these organs do for us as we sort of travel down this respiratory system. So starting with the nose, most of us prefer to breathe through our nose. The reason why is because you have some hairs in your nose that filter out dust particles. You have the ability to warm and humidify air as it sort of comes through your nose and travels back into your airway tube. If you've ever had a cold and you've had to breathe through your mouth, then you know how dry and uncomfortable that gets at night, right? Breathing through your mouth. And then you also have all these smell receptors in your nose, something like 40 million smell receptors. For most of us, some people actually lack the ability to smell, but for most of us, we have millions of these receptors, and that also gives us sensory information. So we like breathing through our nose because then we can smell smoke for fire and make decisions about sort of the environment around us, or smelling food, whether it smells good or bad. We can make decisions about whether it's spoiled, so we protect ourselves from sickness. So in all of these ways, like filtering the air, also like humidifying and warming it to body temperature, and then allowing us that additional sensory information, most of us prefer to breathe through our nose, and it's more comfortable for us to breathe through our nose. So nose, we're going to take in air, but we can do it through our mouth in those cases where we have like sicknesses and whatnot. Once the air comes into your nose, it's going to pass by the back of your sort of neck area, this pharynx area that we talked about with digestive system. The pharynx is the place that really is the intersection between your food tube, your esophagus, which is kind of the second tube in your throat, and then this first tube, the trachea, which is your windpipe or your air tube. These flaps, the epiglottis and uvula, in a relaxed position, allow for air to come into this front tube, the trachea. It's only during swallowing that we force those flaps to cover our nose and our trachea so that we can then force food down our esophagus. But in the most relaxed positions, you're able to breathe. It's interesting, you can't talk and laugh and eat at the same time, right? Because of this compromised area, right? This area where we really have to choose between breathing and eating. And so trying to do them both together will cause you to choke, right? Or cause you this uncomfortable feeling where you almost feel like food is going into your airway. And so we don't like to compromise this area. And so the pharynx is really an important gatekeeper for these two systems. In the middle of your throat, you will find the pharynx. If you hum quietly to yourself, you can feel the vibrations. During exhalation of air, we can move air over these vocal cords almost like guitar strings, and we can vibrate them to produce all kinds of sounds. This is really important because as a primate, you use communication a lot. And so this is a way that we can like sort of communicate. And humans have gotten really good at communicating communicating and even singing and sort of either tensing the muscles around these cords, making them shorter so we can make really high sounds, or relaxing them so we can make low sounds, right? So we can change the shape of them and sing and create all kinds of sounds due to this particular larynx area. During puberty for males, this particular voice box area actually grows longer due to testosterone, and it's a secondary sexual characteristic. It often causes this Adam's apple area in a male to protrude outward. That is actually a gland behind your sort of inner tube jutting outwards and then creating this like kind of bump in the neck. But as males go through this particular time, as their sort of cords in this area is lengthening, their voice not only deepens, but sometimes they have cracking because they have to like figure out how to sort of run this. I have a 14-year-old right now, so like I hear cracking voices in the males that are in and around my house. From the larynx, you are going to go down your airway tube. The airway tube, called the trachea, will then branch into two bronchi. The right bronchi will feed the right lung, and the left bronchi bronchus will feed the left lung. The bronchi, these two tubes, will split into medium-sized tubes called bronchioles. You can see them over here. And then they end in these alveolar sacs, which look kind of like little grapes all clustered together. The air is on the inner part of this sac, and then behind your lungs are all your blood vessels so that we can run blood behind these alveolar sacs. We can take oxygen into the bloodstream and the pulmonary circuit of blood and then give off your CO2 to be exhaled off. This is a dead-end street, so you'll see that this airway doesn't open up or shouldn't open up. And so exhalation will start with these alveolar sacs, work back through the bronchioles, the bronchi, to the trachea, the larynx, pharynx, and then out your nose in order to exhale off your air. So that's a quick trip down the respiratory system. Your assignment for this particular system is to take this particular study sheet, go through on this first page the form and function of how the respiratory system works. Then there are some questions and some applied things and some disorders that we will be talking about in our Zoom meetings. So have a great day, and I'll see you next time.